Welcome to the People Are People podcast, life lessons learned in real time, where we touch on the crazy realities of dealing with human behavior in the workplace. In 2022, I am presenting a series that I simply call the New Manager Series, where we will discuss a variety of topics every manager needs to know to be successful during and beyond their first year of management. Being a manager is not a pretty job. It comes with highs and lows that you must prepare yourself to navigate. This week, we're going to talk a little bit about the need for you to remember to be kind to yourself. So in this episode, I really wanted to talk to you as a new manager, and if you're not a new manager and you're just listening to this podcast series, about the need to be kind to yourself. And the reason I wanted to talk about this, particularly as a part of this series, has everything to do with the fact that there are going to be many days where you as the manager are going to be blamed for everything. I mean, including the reason it's raining outside on a particular day. I feel like having, lived in the manager hat for so many years and or decades, I do feel like the manager often has to shoulder a lot of the expectations of an organization. And when things fail, there is often a need to come all the way down to the manager level and start pointing fingers. And I think it's so much deeper than that. I've lived through it enough to know that it's deeper than that. Now, before I get into what has led me to this conversation today, I just want to say this. Of course, there are bad managers, there are bad frontline employees, and there are bad CEOs, there are bad executive leadership individuals. There's bad apples everywhere within corporate America. I think for me, the problem is the way this article that I'm about to read to you reads, because I've unfortunately been around situations where I have definitely seen people blame managers for any little thing that goes wrong in a particular scenario, any scenario, I should say. And so when I read this article, it just really got my hackles up. And I wanted to come to you in this episode to just give you some voice of encouragement to say that, listen, there are going to be times when you fail as a manager, and hopefully you will acknowledge those days where you made a mistake or something did not quite go off the way it should have, and you understood what needed to be done and it just didn't happen. But there are going to be those times in which you may have to stand up for yourself and identify where the breakdown occurred and then keep it moving from there. There are times where you will have to pick your battles, because unfortunately there are people in corporate America who will never ever believe they did anything wrong and that it's all at your level. Okay. So in those situations where you have to pick your battles, you're going to have to put on the hat of, okay, what do we need to do to move forward? Because the finger pointing and such is just not going to get you anywhere. It'll be a fruitless battle that will drive you insane. So what has led me to today's podcast? Well, it was an article that was posted on Inc.com. I was out on LinkedIn just kind of scrolling through and came across this article titled "Why People Come to Your Company for the Mission and Leave Because of the Manager." And it appears to have been written by Jim Schlechter, CEO of Inc. So I'm going to read this article to you, and I'll also try to remember to put the link to it in my description so that if you choose to go out and take a look at it, you can do so. So it reads as follows. Turnover of any kind inside a company can be problematic, especially these days when everyone engaged in a war for talent. So I think it was supposed to say when everyone is engaged in a war for talent. But that's especially true when it comes to your star employees, the A players, who can be tough to replace no matter what the economy is doing. But figuring out why those key people are leaving can sometimes be a mystery. It can be difficult to understand what's causing them to leave. Over my years of experience, both as a leader and a coach, I've come to the conclusion that people come for the mission and they leave because of the manager. What do I mean by this? People come to work for your organization because they believe in what you stand for and what you do, as well as what kind of work they get to do. That's why this is a critical aspect of hiring A players, or whenever you're hiring for critical positions. As I discuss in my book, Great CEOs Are Lazy, it can often be the CEO's job to take on the role of Chief Talent Officer to help share the inspiring vision and mission for the organization to get A players excited about joining the organization. So, why do people leave the organization? It's not because of the mission, that didn't change. And despite conventional wisdom, most people also don't leave because they're searching for more money. Of course, if you are underpaying your people relative to the market, you might risk a high turnover rate. If you intentionally pay the median salaries for the market, however, most workers will consider that to be fair compensation. And when people feel they are paid fairly, they often see no reason to look for another job. Back to the question at hand then. Why do people leave? The answer I've learned is because of their manager. People leave jobs because they don't like their manager personally, or because they feel like their manager because they don't feel like their manager treats them with respect. Of course, any manager could see one or two of their employees quit at different times. It's when you notice clusters of exits, 3 or more, start to mark a trend, that you should be sending red alerts around the organization because they can inevitably be tied back to a single manager. With just a bit of work to connect the dots, you can zero in on where the problem truly lies. When you know who the problem is, then you need to take action. I remember a time when a company I was running started to lose good engineers at a startling rate. It soon became clear that the common root of the problem was the engineering director, someone who didn't report directly to me. What I did, however, was to go to the director's boss and make it known that there needed to be changes or someone was going to lose their job. I was trying to make the point that people were leaving because of their manager, and I would fire the manager before I could afford to lose any more scarce engineers. The point is that people aren't leaving because they've lost their faith in the mission and direction of the business. They're not even leaving because of their compensation. They're leaving because of the disconnect with their manager. And if that's not something you can remedy, you need to make a change, because no organization can afford a drain on their A players and quality employees. So watch for clusters of departures or even transfers into other departments and trace it back to their leaders. If they lead to a single manager, you need to take action. So, for you new managers out there, this is the kind of thought process that will be floating around in corporate America, and even potentially, anywhere, a small business even. I want you to be aware of this. I know the first time it hit me, I was so infuriated, right? Because and it wasn't anything I had done directly. Let me clarify. I had a coworker that this happened to. But, I had always been in a position where my leadership and further up the chain was very supportive of me as a manager, of my team. And if we started to identify issues, it was not always assumed that the manager was at fault, that there were other influencing factors that was contributing to the attrition. In fact, if you looked back at the annual employee surveys that were done, oftentimes the managers were not the blame. Frontline employees felt very close to their manager and that they could talk to their manager about anything. Oftentimes, what I have seen show up in these employee satisfaction surveys that come out each year is that they feel that there is a disconnect above you as their manager. So I want you to keep that in mind. As long as you are doing your due diligence as a manager to remain engaged with your team, you're always transparent, you follow up with them when they present an issue, you try to troubleshoot, and they're engaged in that process. you're not likely ever going to be the blame of why people leave. This article was just so flawed in the logic that it just got to me. And as I said, I had to come in and put this as a part of our manager series. Okay. So all those things I said to you, as long as you're doing everything that you can do as a manager, everything in that article is not going to be relevant to you, but I want you to be prepared because someone way up the chain is going to think it's because of you that you're seeing attrition. The reasons why people often exit a company or move to another department is because they don't have the right tools and resources to be successful, oftentimes. And yes, unfortunately, that often falls under a single manager. And yes, you can definitely draw a line back to a manager, but a good CEO or leader or, executive will do a little bit of troubleshooting to determine what are some of the influencing factors aside from the manager. Now, again, I said early on, yes, there are bad managers in the bunch, but that is not always the reason people are exiting stage left from a particular manager. Oftentimes, what will occur is, yes, every good organization has a clear mission and vision statement. However, when the upper chain of command fails to do what they're supposed to do to uphold their mission and vision statement down to that frontline employee, employees do become disgruntled, and yes, they will leave. I agree with what the author stated in this article that oftentimes people do not leave because of their salary. Some do. Some have legitimate financial needs that they need to have met, and as much as they love their job, if if they're not going to be able to get that from you, they are going to move on. It doesn't matter how great you tell them they are or how many things you allow them to do that, keep them happy. They're going to exit because they need the income. So I agree with that. Most often they're not going to leave because of salary, but sometimes they do. Now, what I said before about not having the right tools and resources in place and other influencing factors that may contribute to employees leaving from a specific manager. I want to talk about that in a little bit more detail. Oftentimes, what I have seen happen is the upper chain of command does not give the manager of those employees what they need to be successful. Case in point, a lot of times when companies are having financial issues or struggling, they have a tendency to cut back on the human capital, meaning FTEs or partial, employees, part-time employees, that is. And so the work, while the work itself doesn't go away, it sometimes doubles, yet you're not getting the resources you need for your team to be successful. And how does that look? Despite your best efforts, because managers are miracle workers, no matter what others will tell you, you are going to become a miracle worker. No matter how much spit and glue you use to try to hold things together, you come up with creative, innovative ways to try to get the work done, and it works for a little while. If you don't have the necessary resources to get it done in the way of people, folks are going to start to become disgruntled because their plates are going to get overloaded, right? Their workload becomes heavier and heavier to the point that their job is no longer fulfilling. They're no longer enjoying what they do. They're overworked. They're putting in extra hours on the weekend if they're a Monday through Friday employee. Now they're having to work weekends. And that causes them to then lose time with their families. We start to get the whole imbalance of work-life balance. It doesn't happen. So that's one reason why employees will often leave. Another reason employees may leave from a specific manager is if they don't have the right resources to do their job. For example, sometimes if you're not using the most innovative recent technology to get the job done, and your employees feel like rather than being able to get their job done in 3 steps, they're having to do it in 20 steps, that can become cumbersome. And again, no matter how creative or innovative you are as a manager, if you're not really able to solve for that without getting the funding you need to then acquire those resources, people become disgruntled and they start to hear about Acme company who has all the latest technology, who pays a little bit better, who has the perfect work-life balance, who has additional amenities, and they start looking over there. Or they hear about another department where they can do the same job and get everything they need to be successful. Okay, so there's that. Another reason that I've already hinted on that employees leave outside of their manager are influencing factors. And I've kind of talked about some of those influencing factors being not having enough staff on the team to get the work done, not having the right technology, tools, or resources to get the job done. Another reason people sometimes leave is the lack of upward mobility. Depending on your company or the department that you work in, sometimes the ability to climb the ladder is just not there. You've got people who sit in their jobs for 20 plus years, right? They don't move on. They don't go do anything different. Or there may have once been a way to climb the ladder, but because we're trying to save money, those positions get eliminated. They don't backfill positions once people leave. And so people just automatically roll under another manager or another director or, whoever. And so then people lose their upward mobility. Has nothing to do with the mission or vision of the company, but people have career goals. So sometimes when that gets taken away from them and they're very, interested in climbing the ladder, they're going to move on to another department where, guess what? They can get promoted through the ranks and achieve their career dreams. That's the reality of it. Another influencing factor, the sense of stability. Sometimes if you're on a team where you're being shifted every time someone way up the chain decides they want to reorg a particular area. When I say reorg, meaning there's a reorganization where sometimes entire teams or departments will no longer report to, let's say, VPA. Someone wants to move them under VPB because, that person doesn't have enough people that they have oversight for. And by the way, they've got this background in a particular area, and I think this is a better fit over here. Sometimes employees start to feel a little bit of the instability or they may even feel under role if that happens too often. You've heard me allude to the fact, or I've talked about it, I should say, in previous podcasts where I am a perfect example of that, where I got shifted through, I think 5 or 6 different managers in my last year and a half with the company that I was with. So for some people, that can be a lot. And even though they still have the same manager and they like their manager, they've got families to feed. They've got some decisions to make. And if they get a whiff of instability, then they're gone. They're going to go to another department where it looks a little bit more stable, or, they're going to leave the company, period. There's the other reason folks leave, some of the basic stuff, spouse gets a different job. And I know these are basic things that maybe this article wasn't accounting for. Maybe they move away with their spouse. Some people go back to school. I've worked with plenty of people who I know started out in the medical industry and they decided to go get a law degree at 40. And I actually saw multiple people do that one year, and they were all with the same manager, So I just think that this article leaps to bad judgment on so many levels. It's insulting to managers. And I wanted to just come through this podcast, this series, to say to you, should you experience the mass exodus? Of course, there's always opportunity for self-reflection. Determine if, yes, are you the root cause of the exit? But likely you will know exactly what's going on because you will be in touch with your employees quite often. I left out one more thing, and then I'll come back to reminding you to be kind to yourself here. I know one year I had two people retire. There were two other people that I had pretty much mentored and gave stretch opportunities to. They applied for other positions that allowed them to move up to a lead and management position. And I had someone else who wanted to move over into more project management type work, and that person went over. So I actually lost like five people in a year. Had nothing to do with me as a manager. In fact, it had everything to do with me encouraging them to move on and do something different. So, because that's where their passion lied. So, those are just examples of why people leave, some of the influencing factors outside of the manager that it would be great if your leadership maybe had that insight. Now, what can you do to be proactive in maybe countering this or getting ahead of it before the narrative becomes you're doing something wrong as a manager? If you get any inkling that you have people who are about to go, let your boss know. Keep them in the loop. If someone is telling you they're thinking about retiring in a few months, let your boss know as soon as possible. It's not that you're gonna have to do anything or they're gonna do anything, but it puts the bug in their ear that this is coming, and so they won't be surprised if suddenly one or two people are retiring. Encourage your employees to come to you to let you know when they are looking for outside employment or internal transfers within the company. Make sure they feel comfortable doing that. Create an environment where they're comfortable doing that. There should be no retaliation or, taking away duties from them if they tell you they're looking. Your goal is to appear neutral and even better, supportive of their decision. Personally, I always applauded people who realized that they were not in a good position, and I appreciated when they told me they were looking. I think I only would get frustrated when people didn't tell me they were looking, or they would say, well, I'm looking, but I don't think I'm going to move on. It's like, if you're looking, you're probably wanting to move on, and that's okay. So try to create that environment where people feel comfortable letting you know what's going on, and then you can share that information with your boss. And that way, when we have the CEO types like this guy who comes in saying, what's going on? 5 people left your department. Your boss is ready to say, well, yes, we've got people looking for promotion opportunities outside of the department since we're not promoting. We've got people looking to go over here to this department because they have better technology since we're not acquiring that technology. And, that way there's no shockers and you're not having to shoulder the blame. So that concludes the People Are People podcast, Life Lessons Learned in Real Time. Please remember to be kind to yourself. Stay vigilant, stay proactive, and I'll catch you in the next podcast.